By the summer of 1899, long after the Caldwell homestead was reduced to ash and silence, the hollow still refused to sleep. Travelers passing through the Buffalo River basin told of strange mists that gathered after midnight, thick and low, like breath rising from a wound. Hunters swore they heard footsteps pacing along the ridges above them, soft and measured, long after all other sounds of the forest had died. Some said they saw two figures, tall, pale, and barefoot, standing where the old cabin once stood, their dresses clinging to them like burial cloth. Newton County folk avoided that stretch of land altogether. They called it Caldwell Hollow, though none dared to speak the name aloud after sundown. The local preacher in Parthenon claimed the mountain had absorbed evil, that the sisters' blood rites had poisoned the very soil. Yet others whispered a darker theory, that the sisters had never died, never fled, but become something else entirely. Deputy Ezra Thornton, now a man without a badge and without peace, found no comfort in distance. Each night the hollow followed him into sleep. He would wake drenched in sweat, hearing chains drag across stone, hearing scripture murmured in a woman's voice not quite human. He'd left Newton County by train that autumn, taking a job as a night guard at the rail yard in Little Rock. But even among the shrieking iron and hiss of steam, the silence of those hills clung to him. One evening, he received a letter sealed in wax, unsigned. Inside, a single page written in careful, deliberate script. You burned what was meant to live. You sealed what was meant to feed. The mountain remembers. Thornton tried to dismiss it as a cruel jest, but 3 nights later, a freight conductor found the carcass of a mule near the tracks, its hide flayed clean, its bones arranged in a circle of stones. The same scripture from Leviticus was carved into the ground with the precision of a knife. The authorities called it vagrants or lunatics. Thornton knew better. He had seen those words before, written in Mercy Caldwell's trembling hand. Haunted by the letter and his conscience, Thornton returned to Newton County in late 1900. The journey back felt like descending through time. The roads grew thinner, the trees older until the land itself seemed to reject him. He reached Parthenon by dusk, where the townsfolk greeted him with wary silence. The preacher refused him lodging. The blacksmith, Warren Fitch, the same man who had broken the cellar lock, had gone missing 3 months earlier. His hammer was found near the riverbank, rusted, streaked with brine. When Thornton asked about strange lights or missing livestock, the locals turned away. Some debts don't wash clean, one man muttered. You can't burn what ain't done with you yet. That night, in the inn above the trading post, Thornton opened his Bible for the first time since the hollow. Between its pages lay a thin scrap of hide. He didn't know how it got there or whose it was. On it, written in neat, feminine ink, were the words, "The flesh remembers what the mountain takes." The next morning, the mist over Parthenon hung low and colorless, veiling the valley like shroud cloth. Ezra Thornton saddled his horse before sunrise and set off alone toward Caldwell Hollow. He told no one of his intent, though the innkeeper watched from the doorway, crossing herself as he disappeared into the timberline. The trail that led there was almost gone, reclaimed by brush and time. Every turn carried the echo of familiarity, an old sycamore split by lightning, the remains of a stone fence swallowed by moss. The air smelled of iron and rot, the way it had that day when the cellars were opened. By noon, the land began to narrow, the hills pressing in as if to warn him back. He rode slowly, revolver resting across his thigh. The sound of the river came faintly through the trees, though it did not flow the way he remembered. It pulsed like a slow heartbeat beneath the earth. Somewhere deep within the woods, a crow called once and went silent. When he reached the clearing, the place was unrecognizable. The cabin was gone, its ashes long scattered, but the outline of its foundation remained, a black scar across the slope. The root cellars, however, still stood. Their doors, once sealed with stone, were uncovered. Someone, or something, had pried them open. The iron hinges gleamed with fresh oil. Thornton dismounted, lantern in hand. He felt the air shift as he stepped toward the first cellar, a faint exhale from the dark. The smell that rose was neither death nor decay. It was salt, sharp and wet, like the ocean. Yet there was no sea for 1,000 miles. Inside, the cellar was empty. The walls were slick with condensation, and strange symbols had been carved into the rock. Circles intersected by crosses, each filled with smaller, spiraling lines that drew the eye inward. The patterns reminded him of the markings found on the old trapper's maps, where underground springs met the river caves. He turned to the second cellar. Its door was newer, made of heavy oak with bands of cold iron. Across its surface, someone had painted a verse in a trembling hand. "And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are." Thornton's breath caught. He had seen those words before, in Mercy Caldwell's journals. The lock was broken. He lifted the lantern and stepped inside. The light fell upon rows of glass jars, hundreds of them, lined neatly across wooden shelves. Inside each jar floated what looked like water, though the liquid shimmered faintly, as if catching some invisible light. Some jars held nothing but air bubbles. Others held fragments of something softer. Skin, maybe, or the pale remains of hair. At the far end of the cellar stood a crude altar of stone. Upon it lay a single object, a Bible bound in leather that seemed too new to belong to the last century. He lifted it with gloved hands and opened the cover. On the first page, in careful, elegant handwriting, were the words, "To Deputy Ezra Thornton. You were meant to see." The lantern flickered. From behind him came the faint sound of breath, slow, measured, and close. He turned, revolver raised. Nothing. Only the empty doorway and the whisper of wind moving through the hollow. But as he backed toward the light, the lantern flame dimmed again, and in that trembling glow, he saw them, two silhouettes standing at the tree line above the cellar, pale against the dusk. One tall, one small, and both watching him. Thornton stood frozen at the edge of the cellar, revolver steady but heart-pounding like a drum. The two figures on the ridge did not move. Their stillness carried that same inhuman calm he had seen once before, the kind of silence that did not belong to living flesh. He blinked, and they were gone. The wind shifted through the pines, carrying with it the faint sound of singing. It was a woman's voice, soft and distant, rising and falling in tones that made no sense, yet stirred a memory buried deep in his bones. Scripture perhaps, but older than language. He holstered his pistol with trembling fingers and climbed the slope where the figures had stood. The earth was wet beneath his boots, the moss slick, and when he reached the crest, he found no sign of them. Only two impressions in the mud, barefoot, small, and recent. He followed the trail through the trees until it led him to the mouth of a cave, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging roots. He remembered the blacksmith, Warren Fitch, once mentioning caverns that ran beneath the Caldwell property, limestone tunnels that snaked through the mountains, opening into chambers large enough to swallow a house. Now, standing before the dark, Thornton understood what the sisters had called the mountain's veins. He lit another lantern, the flame hissing faintly as it caught. The air inside was thick with moisture and the faint tang of brine. Each step echoed, the sound swallowed quickly by the stone. The deeper he went, the louder the whispering became. Not words, but the hum of voices too many to count, overlapping, merging, dissolving into the rhythm of dripping water. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to stoop. The walls glistened with some oily residue that seemed to breathe when touched by the light. When he placed his hand against it, he felt warmth, a slow, pulsing warmth, like the living hide of some enormous beast. He withdrew his hand quickly. The whispering grew louder. Then came the sound of movement, a dragging, scraping shuffle that seemed to come from both ahead and behind. Thornton drew his revolver, cocking the hammer, his breath shallow. The light trembled across the cavern wall and caught a shape, round, smooth, and pale. He thought it a stone until he realized it was a skull, stripped clean and embedded in the wall itself. Not placed, but grown there, fused into the rock as though the mountain had devoured it whole. He took a step back. Beneath his boot, something cracked. He looked down. Bones, dozens of them, all stripped of flesh, arranged in spirals across the floor. The singing stopped. From the darkness ahead, a soft voice spoke, measured, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. "Deputy, you came back." Thornton's lantern trembled. "Mercy Caldwell," he whispered. A low laugh echoed through the tunnel, a sound that did not belong entirely to a woman. "No," the voice said. The mountain lent her name. She served still. The walls seemed to move then, shifting, breathing. Faces formed in the stone, mouths open as though speaking, yet no words came. Only the same terrible whisper that filled the air like the rustle of dead leaves. Thornton stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. Its flame flared bright, and for one brief instant, the light caught a shape deep in the tunnel, tall, thin, with long gray hair that floated as though underwater. Then the light went out, and in the dark, the voices began to chant. When the lantern died, the dark did not simply return. It awoke. It pressed in on Thornton from all sides, heavy and damp, carrying the warmth of something alive. The air had weight now, a living pulse that shuddered with each breath he took. Somewhere in the blackness ahead, water dripped in steady rhythm, like the ticking of a clock marking down the moments before revelation. He crouched, striking a match with shaking hands. The brief flare revealed the narrow cavern around him, a throat of limestone slick with moisture, the walls veined with something not quite mineral. The substance pulsed faintly, red beneath the surface, as though blood still ran through the stone. He lit the lantern again and took a single step forward. The chanting had ceased, replaced by a sound far worse: breathing. Deep and slow. It came from everywhere at once, rising through the floor, echoing in the chamber above. The mountain was inhaling. Thornton staggered backward until his boot struck something soft. He turned the lantern downward. At his feet lay the remains of a man, or what little time had left of him. The skull had been flayed, polished white, and inscribed with symbols identical to those in the Caldwell's cellar. His ribs had been pried open like a book, and within the hollow of his chest, something glimmered. Small glass jars, sealed tight, filled with cloudy brine. He counted 7 before his stomach turned. A tremor rolled through the cavern. Dust fell from the ceiling in slow, deliberate cascades as if the mountain were exhaling. Then, faint and far, a light appeared down the tunnel, not firelight, but a cold luminescence, bluish and wavering, like lanterns moving underwater. Thornton pressed himself against the wall, extinguishing his lamp. The blue glow grew brighter, revealing figures moving within it. 2 women, tall and pale, their faces colorless, and their hair streaming behind them as though carried by a current. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light like those of nocturnal beasts. They walked without sound, their bare feet leaving no trace in the mud. He could not tell if they were flesh or vision, but when Mercy Caldwell's voice rose, slow, steady, and tender as prayer, he felt his soul recoil. "You've come back to where it began, Deputy. The world above forgot the law of blood, but the mountain has not." Her sister followed in silence, her lips moving in a language that made the stone tremble. The light surrounding them pulsed brighter with each word, illuminating the cavern walls. Faces, and hundreds of them, lined the stone, eyes closed as if sleeping. Thornton turned and ran. His breath tore from him, echoing down the tunnel like an animal's cry. The cave narrowed, twisted, forked, and the air grew thin. The further he fled, the louder the mountain breathed, until it was no longer a sound but a pressure, a living force pushing at his back. When he finally burst from the cave mouth into the gray light of morning, he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Behind him, the opening yawned like a wound. For a long time he could not move, afraid that if he did, the mountain would inhale again and draw him back inside. But as he looked up, he saw something that froze his blood colder than any darkness. The clearing where the cabin once stood was no longer empty. A new structure had risen there, freshly built, smoke rising from its chimney, and from inside came the sound of a woman humming a hymn. Thornton stayed crouched in the thicket for nearly an hour before he trusted himself to breathe without shaking. The air outside was still thick with the scent of rain and iron, but daylight had returned, thin and ghost-colored, filtering through the trees like breath through lace. The cabin before him shouldn't have existed. He knew this hollow better than anyone in the county. He had personally ordered the old Caldwell homestead burned to its foundations 3 winters ago, after the murders and the trial that never truly happened. Yet here it stood again, boards raw and pale as bone, its seams tight and perfect, smoke curling from the chimney as if it had always been there. He crept closer. The new structure wasn't identical, it was cleaner, younger. The door had been sanded smooth, the windows framed by glass that caught no reflection, but the shape was unmistakable. The same slant of the roof, the same porch beam that dipped slightly to the left, as though copied by someone who had studied the original with reverence and obsession. When he reached the steps, a sudden warmth spilled from beneath the door, carrying the smell of bread baking, a human smell. He almost turned back then. Almost. But curiosity, that ruinous appetite of every man who thought himself unafraid of ghosts, pushed him onward. He raised his hand to knock. Before he could, the door opened on its own. Inside stood a woman. Her face was unfamiliar, yet something in her posture, the quiet tilt of her head, stirred memory in him like a whisper from a dream. She wore a plain white dress, hem brushing the floor, and her eyes, clear gray, unblinking, studied him with calm recognition. "You came a long way for nothing, Deputy Thornton," she said. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. "They told me you would." He stepped back, hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "How do you know my name?" "Because you said it," she replied, smiling faintly. "In your sleep." The floor beneath him creaked. He glanced down and realized with a sudden chill that it was the same old timber. The same dark grain scorched by fire, still marked faintly with the cross symbols he'd seen years before. The house hadn't been rebuilt. It had grown back. He stumbled backward toward the door, but she raised her hand. "You burned this place once," she said. "You thought fire could kill what was born of the earth. But the mountain doesn't die, Mr. Thornton. It remembers." From deeper inside the cabin, a second voice called, a low melodic hum, the same hymn he'd heard from the woods. And then came the sound of footsteps on the stairs. 3 small figures appeared in the doorway of the upper hall. Children, all girls, dressed in gray nightgowns. Their hair was pale as wheat, their eyes the same color as the mountain fog. Each one looked exactly like the last. Triplets. They stared down at him in silence. Then, in unison, they began to hum the same old hymn, the same song Mercy Caldwell had been known to sing to her sister before the killings began. Thornton ran. He tore through the underbrush, lungs burning, branches slashing his face. Behind him, the hymn grew louder, clearer, as if the forest itself was carrying it on the wind. When he finally reached his horse, it was dead. Eyes open, throat split clean, as though something had drained it. And on the saddle horn lay a scrap of linen, neatly folded, tied with a strand of hair. Inside, in a child's careful handwriting, were 5 words. "You never left the house." By the time Thornton reached town, night had already begun its slow descent over the valley. The world seemed smaller now, colors drained, edges blurred, like an old photograph losing its will to stay alive. His clothes were soaked through, streaked with mud, and his face carried scratches that stung each time the wind shifted. The sheriff's office sat at the corner of Main and Briar, its single lamp glowing behind fogged glass. He dismounted what was left of his second horse, tethered outside the livery, and pushed through the office door without knocking. Inside, Deputy Mullins looked up from his desk. He had a boyish face and the nervous habit of chewing tobacco without spitting. When he saw Thornton's state, he froze. "Jesus, Ben, you look like you crawled out of a grave." Thornton didn't answer. He walked straight to the water basin, poured a handful over his face, then leaned against the desk, breathing hard. "It's back," he finally said. "The Caldwell place." Mullins frowned. "You mean the ruins up in Coldwater Hollow? That place ain't been touched since—" "No." Thornton's voice cracked. "There's a new cabin. Same wood, same ground. Smoke in the chimney, and there's people in it, Tom. A woman, and 3 girls. Mullins blinked slowly, his jaw stiffening around the wad of tobacco. "You sure you didn't take a knock to the head? There ain't a soul living up that ridge since you torched it. I rode through last fall. Nothing but stones and ash." Thornton looked at him, eyes hollow. "Then who sang to me out there?" The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and something else, iron and pine, the same air from the mountain hollow. Mullins rose reluctantly. "All right. Tomorrow we'll ride out there together, in daylight. You can show me what you saw." Thornton nodded, but deep down he knew daylight would not change what he'd seen. Some places didn't care for the hour or the season. They existed beneath the skin of time, like rot beneath a floorboard. He spent that night in the back room, stretched across a cot that creaked with every breath. Yet sleep did not come easy. When it did, it came wrong. Slow, syrupy dreams that moved like drowning. He saw the mountain again, its slopes pulsing faintly, breathing in rhythm with the night sky. Beneath it, the earth opened like a wound, and from within came the triplets, their hands clasped, their voices one long, unbroken chord. And then he saw himself, buried to the waist in the soil, eyes open, mouth full of dirt. The mountain was shaping his body, his veins turning to roots, his skin darkening like bark. He reached up to tear free, but his fingers sank into the ground as if it were flesh, warm and wet. When he woke, the lamp was still burning low, but something was wrong. The walls were damp as though the rain had seeped through solid timber. The mirror above the wash basin was fogged from within. He wiped it with his sleeve and froze. His reflection didn't move. For a full breath, the image of himself in the glass stared back unmoving, eyes darker than they should have been. Then, slowly, the reflection tilted its head. Thornton stumbled backward, heart thundering. He blinked, and the reflection returned to normal, mirroring him perfectly. The room was silent again. He stood there a long while, trembling, until dawn's first light crept through the window. And on the fogged mirror, traced in streaks of condensation, were words that hadn't been there before. The mountain is awake. Dawn bled into the valley like a wound reopening. A gray sun rose over the ridge, flattening every color into shades of dust and bone. Thornton and Mullins rode in silence, their horses' hooves muffled by the wet earth of the old logging road. Mist hung low between the trees, thick as breath, and the sound of their own movement seemed too loud, like the world was listening. Coldwater Hollow had always been a hard place to find. It wasn't marked on any county map, and locals had learned not to talk about it. The road narrowed to a deer trail, then vanished entirely, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses by hand. Mullins spat into the dirt. "Whole damn place feels wrong. Ain't a bird singing. Ain't even no wind." Thornton didn't answer. His mind was still caught on the mirror from last night. The reflection that had watched him, the words that had appeared without a hand to write them. He hadn't told Mullins about it. Some things were better left unspoken until daylight proved them false. But daylight hadn't helped. When they reached the ridge, the forest opened into the clearing where the Caldwell cabin had once stood. Thornton stopped dead. The cabin was still there. Mullins blinked, then rubbed his eyes as though expecting it to vanish. Well, I'll be damned. It was exactly as Thornton had seen it, the same new timber, the same wisp of smoke curling from the chimney, steady and real. There was no illusion of distance or fog to soften it. It existed. Mullins took a step forward. Somebody rebuilt it. "Ain't no ghost story, just squatters." Thornton grabbed his arm. "Tom, look at the smoke." The deputy turned. The smoke wasn't rising straight. It curled downward, dragging itself toward the ground like a living thing, then slipping into the soil beside the cabin foundation. The dirt there pulsed faintly, as though something beneath was breathing it in. Mullins' face lost all color. "What in God's—" A door creaked open. The woman stood there again, pale, calm, the hem of her dress brushing the threshold. Her eyes were soft, unafraid, as if she'd been waiting for them. "You brought the dawn with you," she said, smiling faintly. "It won't help." Mullins drew his revolver. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside. Now." She did. The sunlight fell across her face, and both men saw it at the same time. Her shadow didn't fall on the ground. It hung in the air behind her, flickering like smoke in reverse. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered. The mountains remembering faster now. Then she looked past them, toward the trees, and her smile changed. Thornton turned. The forest behind them had shifted. What had been trees a moment ago now stood in unnatural symmetry, trunks bent slightly inward, forming a perfect archway over the trail they'd come from. Beneath it, the mist had thickened to the color of milk, moving in slow circles like stirred water. Mullins raised his gun, voice trembling. What the hell is that? The way back, she said. Closing. The air grew colder. Their horses screamed, rearing against their reins. The woman stepped back into the doorway, her eyes darkening like storm clouds. When the mountain remembers a man, she said, it makes a place for him. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed like a hammer on stone. Mullins fired once, glass shattered, but no light escaped the window. Then the ground beneath them began to shift. The soil rose and fell as though the hollow itself were breathing. Thornton grabbed Mullins by the arm. We ride. Now! They turned and ran for the trail, but the archway had already closed. Where the path once was, there stood only a wall of trees, bark wet and slick like skin. From somewhere deep within the cabin, a child's voice began to hum, the same hymn, and the forest began to sing with her. The humming grew louder until the air itself seemed to vibrate. The sound wasn't only heard, it was felt, a slow pulse that throbbed behind the ribs and made the ground tremble beneath their boots. Thornton could taste it in his teeth, that metallic resonance of something ancient and alive. Mullins stumbled beside him, clutching his revolver like a charm against the dark. Ben, he gasped. That ain't no song a person's singing. That's coming from the dirt. He was right. The melody wasn't rising from the cabin now. It was leaking from the ground. The soil cracked open in thin lines, breathing steam. From those cracks came the faint glimmer of light, bluish and cold, the same unearthly shade Thornton had seen in the caves beneath the ridge. Move, Thornton said. His voice broke halfway. We keep moving. Toward the slope. Now. But the forest no longer had a slope. The hollow had shifted in quiet rearrangement, trees bending and roots weaving in directions that hadn't existed minutes ago. The road had become a loop, leading nowhere but back to the cabin, whose windows now burned with the faintest interior glow. The hymn grew louder. 3 voices, clear and young, singing words older than English. The language crawled beneath the skin, reshaping the air. It's the girls, Mullins whispered. The triplets you saw. Thornton could barely breathe. The sound pressed down like gravity. No, it's the land. They're just what's left of it. He turned to run, but his boots sank an inch into the softening soil. It pulsed beneath him, warm as flesh. When he yanked free, something slick followed, a root, pale and smooth, coiling around his ankle like a vein. He tore it loose with a shout. The forest inhaled. The trees bent forward, their branches groaning. The cabin's chimney exhaled a single plume of black smoke, not drifting upward, but spreading outward in tendrils that writhed like ink underwater. In the smoke, faces flickered, blurred, half-formed, mouths opening in voiceless screams. Mullins fired again, 3 wild shots into the air. The sound vanished almost instantly, swallowed by the hymn. The melody shifted, now slower, deeper, like a heartbeat dragging itself through the soil. And then, all at once, silence. No wind, no birds. No sound at all. The cabin door creaked open once more, slow and deliberate. The woman stepped out again, her white dress untouched by the damp. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood the 3 girls, the triplets, each holding something in their hands. Small glass jars filled with cloudy liquid. Inside each jar floated a human eye. Thornton felt his legs weaken. His voice came out low and broken. What do you want from me? The woman smiled. It was not cruel, only inevitable. To finish what you buried. The mountain remembers your kind. It remembers your fire. It remembers your blood. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wet ground. You think you came hunting ghosts, Deputy? But the law never left this hollow. It just changed its face. The girls raised their jars. The cloudy liquid began to glow, soft and blue. It's time to look, the woman whispered. The jars shattered. The light poured out, flooding the clearing in a rush of sound and color, the hymn exploding into every direction at once. Thornton screamed, not in pain but in recognition, because in that light, he saw them. Hundreds of faces pressed beneath the translucent skin of the earth, men, women, and children, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. The land wasn't haunted. The land was them. Every Caldwell that ever lived, every sinner and witness, melted into the soil generations ago. and now it was breathing them back. When Thornton opened his eyes, the world had gone pale. The night was gone, though the sun hadn't risen. It was that in-between light, thin and gray, where shadows had no edges. The clearing was silent, the cabin nothing more than a shape of splintered wood half sunk into the mud. Mullins was gone. His rifle lay near the fire pit, the barrel still warm. The ground beneath Thornton's palms pulsed faintly, not like a heartbeat, but like the slow breathing of something dreaming deep below. His body ached, but worse was the smell, that faint coppery tang of blood mingled with wet soil. He staggered to his feet. The jars were gone. The triplets, too. Only the faint impression of small footprints led into the trees, vanishing after a few yards. He turned toward the cabin, but stopped when he saw movement at the base of the nearest oak. A man's hat, Mullins's, rested atop a mound of disturbed dirt. The earth there was still shifting, as if stirred from within. Thornton's stomach turned as a single hand emerged, pale and slick, grasping upward before falling limp. It wasn't a hand reaching for help. It was being pushed up, offered. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a rusted tin box half buried near the roots. The lid was engraved with a mark he recognized immediately, the 5-pointed star of the Boone County Sheriff's Office, the old design used before the war. He pried it open with his knife. Inside lay a small leather-bound book, water-stained and blackened by age. The name on the first page made his throat close. Sheriff William Thornton, 1842. His grandfather. The handwriting was jagged but legible, the ink faded to brown. The first entries spoke of bandits, moonshiners, and feuds, but as the pages turned, the words grew stranger. June 17th. Found the Caldwell girl at the river bend. Said her father heard voices in the well. She asked for baptism by earth, not water. Said that's how the mountain remembers. August the 2nd. The holler is changing. The trees have grown faces where there were none before. The air smells like iron. I hear my name at night coming from the ridge. September 9th. Josiah Caldwell came to me at dawn. Said the land demanded blood. He showed me the roots beneath his cellar. They were moving. I told him to burn the place. He said you can't burn what's breathing. The final entry chilled him to the bone. October 5th. I've locked them below. Mercy was just a child. Temperance won't stop singing. The mountain is quiet for now. If it wakes again, let the blood of my line be the seal. Thornton closed the book with trembling hands. He finally understood. His family hadn't been investigating the Caldwells for generations. They had been guarding them. He looked around at the hollow, the trees bending inward, their trunks twisted like ribs. The land wasn't cursed because of the Caldwells. The Caldwells were the curse because of him. A sound drifted through the woods, a low, humming tone that rose and fell like the breathing earth itself. Then, through the fog, came a figure. It was Mercy Caldwell. Not aged, not ghostly, exactly as she'd been in 1899, her eyes calm, her voice carrying the same scripture-born rhythm. Your blood opened the mountain once, Deputy, she said softly. It's time it closes again. Before he could move, the earth beneath him split, roots wrapping around his boots like chains. The smell of brine filled the air. The soil swallowed his scream, and the mountain began to hum. When consciousness returned, it came with the steady drip of water and the sour reek of soil. Thornton's first breath burned his lungs. The air was thick, damp, and faintly metallic. He opened his eyes to darkness so complete it felt solid, pressing against his face like cloth. His hands were bound in front of him with something fibrous, not rope, but roots, supple and warm. He lay on a packed earth floor. The texture was wrong. The soil pulsed faintly beneath his palms, contracting and relaxing as though it were muscle. He shifted and the walls around him shuddered in response. The sound that followed was not echo, but breathing, multiplied 100 times over. A faint blue glow stirred somewhere ahead. He forced himself upright, head pounding. The light came from a row of glass jars set into shelves carved directly from the clay. Inside each jar floated a small white object, bones, teeth, fragments of finger joints, suspended in cloudy brine. Beneath every jar was a name scratched into tin. Ridley, 1898, Harper, 1897, Fitch, 1899, the Trappers. He stumbled forward until his shoulder brushed something cold. A door stood there, iron-banded and sweating with condensation. Carved into the wood was a symbol he recognized from his grandfather's journal. A circle crossed with a vertical line, the mark of the seal. He ran his fingers over it. The wood was damp and alive beneath his touch, pulsing in rhythm with the ground. Behind him came a soft whisper. "You weren't meant to wake here yet." Temperance Caldwell stepped out of the dark, lantern in hand. Her eyes reflected the blue light, twin mirrors of something inhuman. She moved without sound, her bare feet leaving no prints in the mud. "Where am I?" Thornton croaked. "Where you began," she said. "Where all your kind begin when the mountain calls them back." She set the lantern on the floor and crouched beside him. Her skin looked translucent in the glow. The veins beneath it shimmered faintly, as if carrying light instead of blood. "Our father told us your grandfather came here once," she murmured. He sealed the wound, but not before it tasted his blood. The mountain never forgets a flavor. Thornton pulled at the roots binding him. They tightened, responding like muscle to pain. Temperance smiled faintly. "Struggle makes it hungry." She turned toward the door. The iron bands quivered as if sensing her presence. "Inside is the covenant. The first sacrifice, the breath that keeps this land alive. You can end it if you wish." "How?" "Open it. Let the mountain feed once more, or take its place and keep it sleeping." Her voice softened, almost kind. "It will be quick, Deputy. You'll sink. You won't drown." He stared at her, then at the trembling door. The humming he'd heard above now vibrated through the walls, rising in pitch until his teeth ached. The jars rattled on their shelves. The bones inside clicked like castanets. Thornton closed his eyes. In the dark behind them, he saw his grandfather's words, written in blood-brown ink. "If it wakes again, let the blood of my line be the seal." He drew his knife with shaking hands. The blade caught the lantern's glow, a thin line of silver against the blue. Temperance watched without expression. "So be it," she whispered. As the blade cut his palm, the mountain exhaled and the roots tightened, drinking deep. The first taste of blood struck the earth like fire. The roots that bound Thornton quivered, absorbing it as if it were a sacrament. The humming rose instantly, swelling into a sound so vast it seemed to fill the hollow, reverberating in every hollow tree, every stone, every drop of moisture clinging to the moss. Thornton tried to wrench free, but the roots held firm. Yet he felt no fear now, only a terrible, encompassing awareness. The mountain itself had awakened beneath his skin, feeding through him, learning him. Every nerve ending pulsed with life older than memory, stretching down into the limestone beds, following the veins of buried rivers, touching every root, every stone, every cell that had ever belonged to the Buffalo River hollow. Temperance knelt beside him, hands pressed to the earthen floor. Her lips moved silently, whispering words older than English, syllables that scratched at the edges of comprehension. Thornton felt them enter his mind, bending perception, unthreading reality until he no longer knew where he ended and the hollow began. Above, the cabin groaned as if alive. The walls bent inward slightly, the boards stretching and tightening, then returning. The jars of bones rattled and shifted, clattering against one another. Each fragment within them seemed to pulse now, faintly, like hearts attempting to beat. And then came a new sound, a low, rasping inhale. Thornton opened his eyes and saw the hollow itself rising in miniature. The soil lifted from the floor, forming shapes like small hills, like faces pressed from inside the clay. The roots coiled around them, breathing, expanding, 100 subtle movements orchestrated in perfect symmetry. It is awake. Thornton's vision swam. Through the pulse of the earth, he glimpsed past centuries, generations of Caldwells, their hands stained, their eyes blank with obedience, kneeling upon the stone floors of hidden cellars, offering trappers, wanderers, fools, and finally, the blood of their own kind. He saw his grandfather, a young man trembling at the edge of the mountain, sealing the covenant, and the mountain breathing in his line, keeping its hunger satisfied. Until now. The humming reached a crescendo, a tidal wave of sound, of being. The walls of the cellar seemed to dissolve, light poured upward through cracks in the ceiling, a spectral blue that seemed to come from within the earth itself, illuminating every root, every jar, every fragment of bone. Thornton felt his mind strain against comprehension. There was no malice here, not in the way humans understood it. Only demand, only balance. The mountain wanted its offering, its covenant renewed. "You may stay," Temperance said, voice calm, almost gentle. "Become its guardian. Feed it, or leave. And it will remember your blood too." The roots loosened slightly, waiting. The jars rattled as though impatient. Thornton pressed the knife to his palm again and felt the warmth of the earth suck it in. He understood, with a clarity so sharp it was painful, that the mountain did not care who he was. It only cared that its covenant was honored, that the balance was preserved. The humming became a roar, and Thornton's scream merged with it, echoing through the hollow, through time. He felt himself lift slightly from the earth, weightless, blood mingling with soil, and knew with absolute certainty that the hollow had claimed him, and in claiming him, had revealed its breath to the living world once more. Above ground, the cabin remained still. The trees leaned inward as if bowing. The wind carried a faint, sweet smell of brine, iron, and cedar. And in the distance, along the Buffalo River, a lone trapper paused, sensing the mountain watching. Him, remembering him, whispering to him. The covenant was renewed. Thornton awoke with a start, the taste of iron still thick in his mouth. The roots no longer bound him, but their faint pulse lingered beneath the floor like the echo of a heartbeat. He sat slowly, head pounding, senses stretched thin. The cellar was quiet now, almost eerily so, yet he could feel the mountain beneath him, alive, aware, and patient. The jars of bones had settled, the fragments floating listlessly in their brine. The blue glow had receded into the walls, leaving only the faintest shimmer, as if the earth itself exhaled with relief. Thornton rose unsteadily and brushed mud from his trousers, every movement sending tremors through the hollow. From the corner of the cellar, he saw them, not the triplets, not Mercy or Temperance, but figures, small and slight, emerging from the shadows. Children, their hair tangled like roots, eyes unnaturally wide. They moved silently, barefoot, carrying small clay bowls filled with earth from the floor. Each took a careful step forward, bowing in unison, offering the mountain its nourishment. Thornton froze. His instincts screamed at him. These were no ordinary children. Their movements were precise, ritualistic, a repetition centuries in the making. Their faces bore the calm of those who had seen the impossible and taken it as normal. "They are the next," whispered Temperance from the doorway, as though reading his thoughts. Her presence was sudden, silent, and commanding. The hollow keeps its own. It chooses who serves and who is served. Thornton shook his head. "Children? Why them?" "Because the mountain is patient," she said, "and those who serve it must be patient too. It does not mistake innocence for weakness. Only those born under its gaze may continue the covenant." The children began moving rhythmically around the cellar, pressing the earth from their bowls into shallow channels carved into the floor. Thornton followed their motions in a trance. The soil responded, rising slightly where it had been pressed, pulsing faintly like a slow heartbeat. The hum he had heard before returned, softer now, like the breath of a sleeping giant. "The covenant is not merely blood," Temperance continued. "It is memory, and loyalty, and life itself. It feeds on our line, yes, but it also preserves it. The mountain does not forget. The mountain never forgives. And the mountain chooses who may walk the earth unscathed." Thornton looked down at his hands, trembling. His blood had fed the hollow, renewed it, yet he felt neither victory nor relief, only weight. The gravity of generations pressed upon him, the knowledge that the Caldwells were merely vessels, temporary servants in a cycle that had lasted centuries. One child stopped and met his gaze, unblinking. The eyes held a depth beyond age, beyond humanity, and in that instant, Thornton understood. The hollow did not merely claim lives. It claimed allegiance, and in return offered knowledge that mortals were never meant to hold. He staggered back toward the cellar's entrance, but the doorway seemed smaller, tighter, as if the mountain itself were adjusting, measuring him. "Do you belong here, Deputy?" Temperance's voice was calm, almost kind, but laced with inevitability. Thornton swallowed. He did not answer. There was no answer. The mountain would decide for him, as it had decided for every Caldwell before him. Outside, the Buffalo River whispered, carrying the faintest scent of brine and cedar. The hollow had taken its claim, and those who dwelled within its shadow would never walk among the living as they once had. And deep beneath the roots, the earth pulsed again, steady, eternal, waiting for the next offering. The Buffalo River ran black and sluggish that morning, carrying the weight of winter melt and secrets older than any settler's claim. Thornton walked its banks alone, the damp earth sucking at his boots, the hollow still humming faintly beneath him. Every rock, every fallen tree seemed to whisper names he couldn't remember, names older than he had been alive, names belonging to men who had vanished into the Ozarks without trace. He could see them, in a way the hollow allowed. Trappers, merchants, even a few lost children, faces pressed to the river's edge, eyes wide, mouths moving silently. They drifted along the current like drowned memories, half visible, fleeting, their presence known only to those who had fed the mountain. Thornton shivered. Some part of him understood that these were the spirits the Caldwells had kept, not tortured exactly, but recorded. Every life taken, every soul touched, left a ripple, and the river was the ledger. A sudden splash made him flinch. Something moved beneath the water, thick and long. He stared, frozen, as a dark shape rose and disappeared into the mist. No splash, no wake. Only the sense that the river itself was alive, feeding, observing. The smell of brine and iron rode the wind again, and the pulse he had felt in the hollow now echoed through his chest, as if the mountain were in him still. He remembered the jars, the chanting children, the roots swallowing his blood. Every step now felt heavier, as though the river sought to pull him in, to merge him with the countless others it carried. The hollow reaches farther than you think. Temperance's voice whispered from behind him, though he had seen no one. The mountain does not end where its walls end. It touches the river. It touches the forests. It remembers all it has ever taken. Thornton spun. There she was, standing among the mist, serene and terrible. Her gaze traced the ripples along the water. "Every person who comes here leaves a mark," she said softly. "Some go willingly. Some are remembered." He tried to speak, to ask how many had been lost, how many names he had walked past without knowing. But the words stuck in his throat. The river whispered them back to him, fragments of the past woven into its current. John Ridley, Amos Rudd, James Whitmore. Names, faces, their last moments preserved in water and memory. "It is not revenge," she said, "nor cruelty. The mountain only keeps what is offered, and the river carries those who were forgotten, so we may remember." Thornton bent close to the water, peering into its mirror-black surface. For a moment he saw himself reflected, older, hollow-eyed, the pulse of the mountain in his veins. And below, faintly, the shapes of the trappers he had sought, swimming in the dark, suspended between the earth and the river, held by the hollow and the mountain alike. The wind shifted, carrying a faint hymn, and Thornton realized that the mountain's voice was everywhere. In the trees, the rocks, the river, the mist, in every shadow. The hollow did not end in its cellar. It never ended. Temperance stepped back, letting the mist swallow her. "Remember, Deputy," she said, her voice fading with the wind. "The mountain's law is older than men, and it does not forgive those who forget its covenant." Thornton remained by the riverbank, silent. The river whispered, carrying the names of the lost along its endless journey, and in the echoes he understood. The mountain's claim extended. Beyond the hollow, and all who walked the land were, in some way, marked forever. Night fell with a weight that pressed down on the Buffalo River Valley, thick as wet wool. Thornton stood at the edge of the forest, the echo of the hollow still thrumming in his veins. The river ran silently beside him, carrying the distant memories of trappers long vanished. He had walked its banks for hours, listening to the whispers of the mountain, each name a muted scream against the current. And then he heard it, the soft, deliberate crunch of bare feet through moss and leaves. The triplets appeared from the mist, their faces pale and unyielding. Behind them, Temperance and Mercy Caldwell followed, moving with the calm inevitability of a tide. Thornton's heart hammered, but there was no place to run. The hollow, the mountain, and the river had claimed him. They had stretched their roots into every nerve, every sinew of his body. "The covenant is complete," Mercy said, her voice echoing as though carried by the very wind. "You have given what was asked. But the mountain wants more than blood." Thornton swallowed. His vision was sharp, the pulse of the land beneath his feet an unbroken chain to the hollow. What does it want?" Temperance stepped closer, small and precise, her eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "It wants understanding, obedience, proof that the line it touches may endure." She raised a hand toward the river, and the mist parted like smoke curling away from a flame. "And it has chosen its final offering." Thornton realized then that he was no longer merely a man in the woods. He was part of the covenant. The mountain had consumed him, transformed him. He could feel the earth beneath him pulse with recognition, respond to his thoughts and movements. The roots that had once bound him now curled gently around his ankles, protective, demanding, alive. "Step forward," Mercy said, "or remain here, and the hollow will take you entirely." Thornton's breath came fast. He glanced back toward the river, imagining himself sinking into its black waters, joining the forgotten, carried forever along its silent current. But the hollow called louder, deeper, its voice rising through the roots and soil, demanding his allegiance. With a shuddering resolve, he stepped forward. The mountain seemed to inhale, and the ground rippled under his boots. The triplets scattered, kneeling in the dirt, pressing their bowls of earth to the floor, chanting in the old language of the hollow. Thornton joined them instinctively, feeling the pulse of the mountain in the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Mercy and Temperance watched silently. The hum rose to a roar, a voice not human yet intelligible, speaking through him, through the earth, through the river itself. He understood the covenant now. The offering was never meant to destroy, only to perpetuate, to preserve the memory of the mountain's claim. The balance between the living and the buried, the river and the hollow. The jars of brine and bone shimmered in the moonlight, no longer grotesque but sacred, a ledger of the lost catalogued and honored. Thornton felt his hands tremble, yet he did not resist. His blood, his breath, his memory flowed into the mountain, joining the countless others that had come before him. And as he knelt, he realized the truth. The hollow kept its own, but it did not destroy them. It transformed them into guardians, witnesses, part of the living memory that the Buffalo River Valley would carry forever. The humming softened to a gentle pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the forest floor. Thornton lifted his head and looked around. The river shimmered silver in the moonlight. The forest leaned inward protectively, and in the distance, a faint blue glow receded into the earth. The covenant had been renewed, and Thornton, like the Caldwells before him, was now part of the hollow's eternal keeping. The Buffalo River lay quiet beneath a pale dawn, the mist rising from its surface like the breath of sleeping giants. Thornton stood at the edge of the hollow, shoulders stiff, eyes heavy with the weight of centuries. The pulse of the mountain was faint now, a subtle thrum beneath his feet, yet he felt it in every nerve, every thought. It had claimed him, shaped him, bound him to the earth, yet it had not destroyed him. He had become its witness, its memory, its guardian. The cabin was gone, reduced to splintered boards and ashes, but the land remembered. Every root, every stone, every hollow and cavern hummed with life unseen. The jars of brine and bone, the hidden cellars, the chanting children, all had vanished from sight, yet their presence lingered like a shadow over the valley. Thornton could feel them, guiding him, reminding him of the covenant renewed. The wind stirred the trees, carrying whispers that were not voices, yet somehow intelligible. Names, dates, fragments of lives lost or consumed by the hollow drifted on the breeze. He understood them now, not as horrors but as threads in a tapestry, woven over generations, preserved by the mountain's patience and the Caldwell's obedience. The trappers, the merchants, even the lost children, they had not vanished. They existed here, in memory, in covenant, in the earth itself. From the mist, Mercy and Temperance Caldwell appeared once more, unchanged, their forms etched against the blue-gray morning. They did not speak, yet Thornton felt their presence like a command, a benediction and a warning all at once. The sisters were no longer human in the way the world understood it. They were conduits of the mountain's will, embodiments of its covenant, eternal and unyielding. Thornton knelt in the damp soil, letting the pulse of the earth seep into him. His blood had joined the mountain, his memory would feed it, his allegiance sealed it. He felt the hollow shift beneath him, roots extending deeper, weaving into the riverbeds, into the forests, into the very bones of Newton County. The mountain did not forgive, it did not forget, it did not need vengeance. It simply remembered, and those it remembered served as its hands. As the sun rose over the Buffalo River, Thornton lifted his eyes. In the distance, the faint blue glow of the hollow receded into the hills, leaving the valley quiet, still and eternal. Travelers along the river would continue to whisper the story of the Caldwell sisters and the vanished trappers, never fully understanding what had occurred, never questioning the pull of the hollow in the back of their minds. The mountain's memory was beyond their reach, yet it touched them all, shaping the land, guiding fate, preserving its covenant. Thornton rose slowly, feeling the weight of centuries on his shoulders. He would not speak of what had happened, could not. The covenant demanded silence, obedience, and presence. He was no longer merely a man. He was the hollow's witness, its guardian, a vessel in the eternal rhythm of earth and river, root and stone. The Buffalo River flowed onward, carrying the names of the forgotten, the lost, and the bound. And deep within the Ozark Mountains the hollow waited, patient and alive. The mountain remembered, and it always would.